us now on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline as we switch from basketball back to football is Connor Rogers, NFL draft analyst, expert, again, of Bleacher Report. Connor, nice to have you on the show.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. How's it going?
Fantastic, thank you. Your bio says you are a former USAPL competitor. That means you were a power lifter. How is it that you got into that? And we want to know, what is it like to be a strong guy? Because that's something that we're still striving for.
Well, it's kind of funny because even smaller guys can power lift. When I was in college, I went to Albany University in New York, and the guys at the gym I went to wanted me to get into it. They needed a guy in one of the lower weight classes. I was probably about 160 pounds at the time, and they wanted a guy to compete in 148. And, I wasn't playing sports anymore, and, obviously you can't just study 24/7. So I started powerlifting there and competed a couple of times at 148, which is a nightmare of a weight class to get down to when you're a 18 to 22-year-old college male that just wants to be drinking beer and eating terribly. But, I did it for about a year and a half or 2 years very competitively, and it was awesome. And the good thing about being down at 148 is I think the competition wasn't as brutal as the guys that are about 185. So, came away with a couple of first-place finishes and had a really good time doing it.
So what was the most you ever lifted?
I was a 400-pound deadlifter, about a 255 bencher, and squat probably about 275. And right now I'm back up to 170, 175. So still doing those lifts, just about 30 pounds heavier.
Well, Connor Rogers has now taken his powerlifting skills to analyzing the NFL and specifically the NFL draft and combine. How did that transition take place? What got you into the NFL and the passion going for scouting players and what teams want to do with the NFL draft?
Well, of course, I'd always been a fan of the NFL. And, when I went to school, I was actually in the business school at Albany, but I like to write on the side. So, I picked up a minor in English. I didn't study journalism. Listen, it's great if you go to a school with a great journalism program, but I felt like I got a little more out of the business program while I was at Albany. But I was still writing on the side. There were so many opportunities, and there still is now, but even back then, just to, be a freelance blogger, I got to, kind of help cover the Jets and their angle of the draft for a long time. When I came out of college, rather, accepting jobs in the business field, I picked up a researcher position at Bleacher Report, because it's kind of hard to pass that up when you can work in football when you're a 22-year-old kid right out of college. So, I took a swing at that, and I've kind of just worked my way up here and, started writing for them and working very closely with Matt Miller, and it's honestly been a blast. I love it. And it's turned into a year-round media coverage, which is not what it always used to be.
The highest profile BYU Cougar entering the draft is Jamaal Williams, and you have him as number 5 in your top 5 running backs. What is it about Jay Swagdaddy that you like?
Well, it's funny because I actually wrote a really long piece on him for FanRag Sports back in October before he kind of blew up. I think people had known he was a successful player for them for a couple of years and year off, then came back and was tearing it up again. And that was when I kind of got welcomed to the BYU family, which is honestly one of the hardest things about covering the draft. It can be dealing with college fans if you don't necessarily love their players. And with BYU, it's been the opposite because here I was watching this guy, and I was like, this is the best top 5 running back that nobody's talking about. And I literally think that's part of the headline of the piece. And instantly, I started tweeting out clips of him. And once it picked up a little traction in the BYU community, they were, I left my DMs open. People were DMing me. Do you think he can get drafted? Do you think he can go in the day 2 of the draft? And I love this kid. I don't understand why people are overthinking this. And I understand, listen, he's not the greatest athlete in the world. He's not going to be the fastest guy in a straight line speed. But there are so many starting running backs in the NFL that aren't necessarily fantastic at that either. And when you watch him play, he's a workhorse. And he's proven that. 3 seasons at BYU, over 1,000 yards. The guy is just an absolute workhorse back there. He can pass protect. He has great lower body power, leg drive. He can catch the ball. He's obviously excellent in the red zone. I don't really know what questions people can raise about him. He's obviously not a Leonard Fournette. He's not a Christian McCaffrey. But if you're looking for a guy that has a chance to be a starting running back when you're picking in the 3rd round, 4th round of the draft, I have a feeling he's going to be sitting there and make a team really happy.
So if I were to ask you today, if the NFL draft were happening in the next 24 hours, where Jamaal Williams would get drafted in terms of a round and selection, where would you essentially put your money on that pick?
I would take him on the second day of the draft. Just from people I've talked to, it sounds like he's going to sit right between that 4th and 5th round range. And there's a couple of factors that go into that. Number one is, a lot of people know, this is an excellent running back class. And that's just, a beauty and a beast at the same time, because obviously there's so much talent there, but players like Jamal get pushed down, where in a normal year they can go 50 to 70 selections higher than that. Number two, the value of the running back position, I think, has crashed in the NFL. As we're seeing in free agency right now, nobody is spending money on running backs, and there are some good running backs out there right now. I mean, nobody wants to spend money on guys like Adrian Peterson, Latavius Murray, Jamaal Charles. Some of them are at the back end of their career, but at the end of the day, it's just easier to go to the draft and get a running back later on, and that's why I say, just because he's not sitting in everybody's top 50 or top 100 prospects doesn't mean that he's not going to be an NFL starter. And I also think the value with him is that he's pro-ready. There's no questions about him being able to get on the field right away.
So you don't think that, because let's be honest, Ezekiel Elliott's a special talent, but you don't think what he did last year with the Cowboys is, ramping up the interest in running backs this year?
I think it's a bit of an outlier because of the situation. I think it's hard to take a running back in the top 5 or top 10. And when you look at the Cowboys across the board, obviously before the Tony Romo injury and even after it, they had an answer at quarterback. They had an answer at all 5 offensive line spots, and they had an answer at number 1 wide receiver, and they were slowly building that defense. They didn't really have anything at running back. So when you look at, taking the best player available, you can take a running back. Now, a lot of teams aren't in the Dallas Cowboys' shoes where they have that offensive line build. They need to spend the premium picks on premium positions. It's simple as that. So they're a bit of an outlier, and that's where it kind of hurts even guys like Leonard Fournette that could fall out of the top 10. When you're talking about overall top 10 talent, they should definitely be there.
Connor Rogers, NFL Draft Analyst from Bleacher Report, with us on BYU Sports Nation. How loaded is this year's draft at the running back spot specifically?
I mean, it's a great crop when you look across the board, and it's an interesting crop because you have a guy like Leonard Fournette. Like I said, he's a top 10 player in the class and is going to go in the first round. You have somebody like Christian McCaffrey, who is also probably going to go in the first round, and a totally different running back, versatile. I mean, obviously you guys have seen him. He's just a special, dynamic threat. And then you have a lot of interesting players. Joe Mixon, the off-field issues are so concerning. If he didn't have those, he'd be a top 20 lock, I think. He's that kind of talent. But the off-field issues are probably going to push him to the end of round 2 or early round 3. Dalvin Cook didn't test well at the NFL Combine, but when you watch the tape, I mean, he's a fantastic player. He can create on his own. I think he could do a little bit of everything. And he had home run speed on the field. He didn't show it in Indianapolis at the Combine, but when he puts the pads on, it's there. And then you get into the next tier of backs. You have guys like Jamal, Alvin Kamara, Curtis Samuel. These guys, listen, they're starting running backs that are going to be there in rounds 4 and rounds 5, which is absolutely insane, but it goes to show you how deep this class runs.
The Combine is always a tricky thing. Some people put all the stock in it. Some try and diminish it a little bit. How do you believe Jamal's performance at the Combine either helped or hurt his draft stock? And also, Harvey Langi is the other BYU player that if there's going to be another one drafted, it's probably going to be Harvey. What about his performance at the Combine, and what are you hearing about him?
Well, I think with Jamal coming into it, I think his goal was to be under 4.6 because, like I said, people knew this isn't a guy that's going to be a straight line runner. So he needed to get under 4.6, and he got 4.59. So I think he stays right where teams had him. I don't think anything changes. I think his testing matched what you saw on tape. You can't ask a guy that specialty isn't straight line speed to go run a 4.40 at the NFL Combine. It's not fair. So you don't change or move your grade. You just need him to get below it. There's a threshold for everything. And for a running back, you'd like them to be under 4.65. And, he got there. So I think he'll be just fine. And then when you look at Harvey, he's one of the more interesting players on, the very, very late rounds of this draft because they've asked him to do so much at BYU, as you guys know. He's moved around. I thought he could be a really good middle linebacker. Then he played on the edge a bit. And the bottom line is, and he's a good athlete. He showed that at the Combine. I mean, he was a top performer in not only the 20-yard shuttle, but also the 60-yard. So I think when you look at him, you have the physical makeup to be a very effective special teams player, and it just depends on the fit. Can he find a job as a backup linebacker? Of course. But, you land in a spot like New England where they coach up special teams and you just need to be an athlete like Harvey is. I think he could be fine. I think he's going to get drafted too. I talked to a lot of BYU people that are very interested in Jamal, and they want to know, hey, can Harvey get drafted? And I said, yes, definitely. 6th, 7th round. Teams value special teams, I would say, more than ever right now. You need guys that can run down the field, cover kicks. If he's willing to make that adjustment, he has definitely a good shot to make it in the NFL.
Everybody wants to know what a good fit is for these BYU guys, and maybe you haven't thought to this degree, or maybe you have, but with Harvey maybe going to the Patriots or a team like that on special teams, what about Jamal? What would a good fit for Jamaal Williams be if he wants to have a significant role in the NFL?
I don't think he has to stray too far where I'm located at. I think the New York Giants are a perfect fit for him. I mean, obviously they've cleared their running back depth chart a bit. They haven't been overly active. Adrian Peterson was being linked to them before free agency. It doesn't seem like there's any interest there. They took another good running back on day 3 of the draft last year in Paul Perkins, and he was effective when he got the ball last year. He's a totally different runner than Jamal. He's elusive. He's a quick guy in space. Jamal can be that power workhorse kind of guy. You listen, they're just looking to build, a trio or, some kind of duo of running backs. And that's a place where he wouldn't be asked to take on a very, very heavy workload right away, but he would still be able to get on the field right away. And I think with Ben McAdoo there, they just got a very good blocking wide receiver and overall wide receiver, and Brandon Marshall to pair with Odell Beckham. They're going to try to get the most out of Eli Manning that they can at the tail end of his career. I just think that's a great fit for him.
Contributor for USA Today Sports, NFL draft analyst for Bleacher Report, Connor Rogers. Hey, we appreciate the time, Connor, and the insight into Jamaal Williams and Harvey Langi, and we obviously are watching very closely. If you couldn't tell, BYU Sports Nation is very invested in what these two guys are doing.
Yeah, you guys are great. Thanks for having me on. It was good talking to you.
You got it.
Thanks,
Connor Rogers on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Deseret First, your values, your timeline, your financial future.